In this season of Sangha we're exploring Sangharashta's, I'm not quite sure what we're calling them, 5 aspects of the spiritual path.
It's on the board.
I know, it's what it says there. They used to be the system of meditation, then they became the system of practice, and now they're the 5 aspects of the spiritual path. Okay. They're the 5 aspects of the spiritual path, aka the system of practice or the system of meditation. They're much more than a system of meditation. And what we're also doing in this series is, as far as we can, we're exploring this by the means of stories, by stories that illustrate the various aspects of the system. I said in the introduction to this series, these 5 aspects are not something that Sangharashta invented. He didn't sort of pull them out of the air. These 5 aspects are a description of how human beings grow, spiritually. If we said that a plant needs to germinate from a seed and then put up a stem and put down roots and then put out leaves and then eventually produce flowers which produce fruit, that wouldn't be something we'd just sort of invented out of the air. That would be a description of a process that actually happens. It would be a description of the growth of a plant, how that happens. And the five aspects of the spiritual growth, of spiritual path, are a description of the way human growth happens, description of the way that human beings grow spiritually. So Sangharashta is describing something universal here. He's describing something quite universal. It's not limited to Buddhism. Although I am pretty sure that Buddhism gives us the tools to take it further and do it better, more quickly, more completely than we would otherwise have. But because those 5 aspects describe something universal, there are all sorts of myths and stories that we can relate to them from the world's different cultures, not just from the Buddhist tradition, but from cultures all over the world, that tell us something about different aspects of this process. The stories that human beings tell, or certainly the stories that human beings tell which last and get passed on from generation to generation, they do that because they speak to us. They do that because they speak to us, they speak to something deep inside us. And what is deepest in human beings is this desire to grow and develop and become the beings we could become. So we're spoiled for choice on stories that relate to these 5 aspects of the spiritual path. So just to recap here, the 5 aspects of the spiritual path that Sangharashta has identified are integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity. And it's not that you sort of have to do one and then you start the other, any more than a plant produces roots and all its roots and then it produces all its leaves, as it were. These, to some extent, happen simultaneously. But there's a sense in which you can't go further with the later stages than you've gone with the earlier ones, in the same way that a plant that tried to fruit before it got a healthy root system would just keel over. So far in this series, we've been looking at, as it were, the whole process that's described by these 5 aspects in a quite general way. First of all, we looked using the Lord of the Rings, and then we looked using the historical Buddha, the life of the historical Buddha, as examples. And tonight what we're going to do is start looking in more detail at the very first of these aspects, integration. Okay, so what do we mean by integration? It's a bit of a code word, really. It's maybe a bit of psychological jargon. I think the term was first used in the way that we're going to use it, in the way that Sangharashta used it. I think, correct me on this, as far as I'm aware, by the psychologist Carl Jung. He also, I believe, called it individuation. It's the process by which we become an individual. which he saw as the goal, as it were, of his school of psychology. It's the process by which we become a united individual, able to make our own decisions and carry them through, able to stick to a course of action once we've decided upon it, with all the different aspects of ourselves cooperating to help us, able to call on all our different energies so that we're not fighting ourselves, we're not pulling in different directions. We've got all the different parts of ourselves, as it were, helping us to be a potent human being and a happy, healthy, united human being. Because we don't start life as a unified being. We don't start life as a unified being whose energies and desires are all running in the same direction and they're all harmonized. Actually, it's a bit as though we start life as a sort of bundle of rather loose, of different people, rather loosely tied together by a name, a body, and a shared history. We're different people in different situations, or we're different people when we're with different people. We're one person at work, maybe a different person with one set of friends, a different person again with a different set of friends, completely different person again with our parents. We might be acting like a 15-year-old with our parents, etc., etc. And then we're also different people for no apparent reason, because of our quote-unquote moods. So one day we're in the mood to meditate or to exercise, and the next day we're in the mood to eat loads of crisps or to feel sorry for ourselves or whatever. Moods come up and they go, and it's almost as though we were different people. We make resolutions when we're one sort of person, and then we decide that really wasn't a very good idea when we're a different sort of person. So, hey, I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock every morning and run 3 miles and meditate. And that seems like a really good idea to one part of me that I could give a name. But the name I would give it a week later might be a different name. It really doesn't seem like I need my sleep. And it's warm in here, etc. It's as though we are different people at different times. Just because we're in different moods. We make resolutions, as I said, when we're one person, and a week later they don't seem like a good idea anymore. Maybe we find ourselves being bad-tempered and irritable when what we thought we wanted was to be pleasant and friendly. For no apparent reason. It seems as though it just came up from nowhere, as though we were possessed by someone else and behaved in this irritable or bad-tempered way. Maybe we don't have any clear goal that we stick to. So one day we want to be one thing, and the next day we want to be another. One day it's all about, I'm going to have a good time, and the next day I've really got to get on with this career, or whatever it is. Or else we think we have a clear goal in our life, but for some reason we find ourselves doing all sorts of things that undermine it or don't contribute to it. So we think my goal is enlightenment, spiritual liberation, but why do I get tangled up in all these worldly sort of commitments, like this job and this relationship and this whatever, if that's what I'm really about? Take me in the opposite direction, or we think our goal is to create a better world for all beings, but everyone else can see that all the decisions we make in our actual life point to us caring very, very deeply about ourselves, first and foremost. So the fact is that unless we do a lot of work on ourselves, a lot of our motivations are a bit of a mystery to us, actually. We talk on the intermediate course, don't we, about us being a bit like a horse and a rider. I don't know if you remember the analogy. The rider being, as it were, the conscious mind, and the horse, the rest of us. And the rider thinks, over there, spiritual liberation, the well-being of all beings, or whatever it might be. But the horse is going over there, and everybody else can see that. And usually, my little joke is the horse is usually going towards a full nose bag, a warm stable, and other horses that it finds sexually attractive. The fact is that unless we do a lot of work on ourselves, a lot of our motivations are a bit of a mystery to us. They're down in the horse. We human beings have an almost endless capacity for self-delusion. We have plenty of unpleasant, grungy aspects. Selfishness, competitiveness, even malice, jealousy, greed, cowardice. They're going on in most of us, all that sort of stuff. But we all generally think we're really nice people. And in our interaction with the world, we carry on a sort of press conference for ourselves. We're our own PR agent, spinning everything so that we're always in the right and we're always good. And we get taken in by our own press conference, our own spin. So unless we make a real effort, we don't want to look at the darker aspects of ourselves and face them and own up to them. And this is one aspect of what psychologists call the unconscious, is those bits of ourselves that we just won't look at because we don't like them. We won't look at them. And the thing is about them, they really, really, really are unconscious. That means we don't know about them. So it's a slightly challenging statement. If you're sitting here and thinking, well, that might be true of everybody else, it's not true of me. Think again. Because the whole thing is we don't know about these things. They're unconscious. They really are unconscious. Our conscious mind is a bit of just like a sort of surface tension on a deep sea. And there's lots of monsters in the deep sea. A lot of our being is subconscious or unconscious. Many aspects of ourselves that we don't know about. And that doesn't mean those aspects go away. It just makes them more powerful, more destructive, because they can rule us without being aware of them. An awful lot of spiritual life is actually about becoming aware of these aspects. I mean, a little sort of anecdote we always tell, because it comes up over and over again, is the number of people who on introductory courses say, well, I don't have anybody to put in the fourth stage of the Metta Bhavana because there's nobody I dislike. But then by a couple of months later, there's loads of people fighting to get into the fourth stage of the Metta Bhavana. And the difference is that we haven't become nastier people. The difference is we're actually willing to own up. We've become more aware of our minds. We're willing to own up with it. Actually, she really irritates me. It's not that I want to do away with her, but why the heck she's irritating. So, you know, that's part of getting to know ourselves. So that's one way that we don't start life as integrated individuals. We ignore the darker side of ourselves. The other way in which we don't know ourselves, which is much more positive in a way, where we need spiritual work, is that we're not just not aware of our depths, we're not aware of our heights either. We're not aware of the being we could be, our potentials. There are things in us which are wonderful and beautiful and which we ignore because we're not aware of them. We don't give them a chance to come out. And when we do give them the chance to come out, they're not what the kids at school would have liked or the people at work. We repress those aspects. The psychologist Jung again used to talk about the repression of the divine. He said it's not just the horrible things we repress, it's, if you like, what he called our divinity, our higher side, we also repress because it could seem weird in our society. It's not socially acceptable. So getting to know ourselves, if you like, so that we can integrate ourselves has these two aspects, getting to know what I've called the depths, if you like, and getting to know the heights. Our talks on this are going to be divided into those two sections. So tonight, I'm going to kick off talking about integrating our depths, and later on we'll look at integrating our heights, if you like. So tonight I'm going to kick off three evenings of integrating our depths. I can't two or three. Talking about the first thing we need to do, to integrate our depths, which is to become aware of them and face them and own up to them, own up to our actual motivations, so that we can begin to get to know them and use the energy that's tied up in these lower motivations to the things that our higher self, to drive the things that our higher self wants to achieve. And if we don't do that, well, our spiritual life is probably a bit of a fantasy. There's a bit of a joke, isn't there, about somebody who asks somebody else, presumably some sort of country person, how do you get to so-and-so? How do you get to such and such a place? And the response is, well, if I was going there, I wouldn't start from here. And I think we're often a bit like that. If I was going to enlightenment, I wouldn't start from here. So I'll try and start somewhere else. But actually, we need to start from here, because if we don't start from where we really are, we won't get to where we want to go. So we've got to know our darker side. And I'm going to explore that aspect of integration tonight using a traditional story from the northeast of England, the story of the Lambton worm. Some of you might know this story from a rather jokey folk song that used to do the rounds when I was at college and used to go to folk songs. Maybe it still does. But the song is based on a story that I think we can really call a true myth, in the sense that it says something deep about the human condition. It tells us something important about the way we human beings all too often behave in a way that makes a real mess of our lives and our world. So I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to discuss how it has bearing on our spiritual lives and our integration. And I'm going to talk about what we can maybe do to learn the lessons of it. So our story starts in the Middle Ages. I'm not going to sing the song, and I'm not going to do it in a Sunderland accent. That would be fun. So it starts in the Middle Ages, at the time of the Crusades. And the main character is Sir John Lambton. One Sir John Lambton, the son and heir of Lord Lambton, his father. And Sir John Lambton is said to be an unruly, willful, bad-tempered, and spoilt young man. And the story starts when one Sunday morning John Lambton goes fishing in the River Wear. And in the mentality of the Middle Ages, this is significant, because where should he be on Sunday morning? He should be in church. We might think that skipping church is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but in the mind of the Middle Ages, what this means, this is a signal. He is ignoring the spiritual. He is ignoring the spiritual and just looking for his own pleasure. So he goes fishing instead of going to church. And while he's fishing, a strange man comes along, a friar, a wandering holy man. And the strange friar warns him, and he says that fishing, instead of going to church, is going to end badly. This focus on your own pleasure, ignoring your sort of spiritual side and ignoring your duties as a lord to your community, not good. It's going to end in tears. But young Lambton is having none of this. He shouts and he swears and he jeers at the friar. He is not very receptive. And then while he's fishing, young John Lambton catches a very, very strange fish. The song says he caught a fish upon his hook he thought looked very queer. He catches a very strange fish, a type of fish he's never seen before, and a fish he doesn't like the look of. And the friar, who's sort of been hanging around in the bushes, says, "It's the devil. You've caught the devil." But once again, young Lambton takes no notice of him and swears at him and tells him to go away. And then he throws the strange, unpleasant-looking fish down the well. There's a well nearby, and he throws it down the well, out of sight, out of mind, and heads home, presumably for his Sunday lunch. So fishing, well, water. Water is a pretty universal symbol for the unconscious. You can't see beneath it. There's all sorts of things under there that you can't see. It's very often a symbol for the unconscious, and fishing a symbol for sort of pulling things out of the unconscious. Lord Lambton's become aware of something about himself that he's not usually aware of, and he doesn't like it. It's fishy. So, I don't like this. Down the well with it. I don't, back. I don't want to be aware of that. I don't want to be aware of that. Down the well. Back into the unconscious, instead of facing the fact that it is part of him. So he forgets all about this unpleasant fishy thing that's down the well. He doesn't deal with it. Instead, being a knight at the time of the Crusades, he decides to go and fight what he sees as evil out there, other people's evil. He joins the Crusades and he goes off to Palestine to fight the evil infidels. So Sir John takes the long, arduous journey down through Britain, all the way across Europe, down through the Levant, the Middle East, as it were, all the way to the city of Jerusalem, so that he can fight the evil Muslims and liberate the Holy Land. He spends 7 years fighting battle after battle after battle. He kills many people. He himself gets wounded many times. He suffers, he gets fevers, until eventually he becomes sickened by the pointlessness of it all. He maybe starts to see that he isn't actually fighting evil. He is fighting other human beings who have the usual mixture of positive, negative, and negative qualities, pretty much the same as the Christians he's fighting alongside. So he starts to see that he can cut off people's heads, but he can't cut off the head of evil. No matter how many people he kills, evil has as many heads as there are people out there operating on greed, hatred, and delusion. Those three forces which are at the centre of the wheel of life and which drive us to the extent that we're unenlightened. Attachment, things we want, things we want to push away, and the fact that we don't see the world as it is. So disillusioned and disappointed, after 7 years he decides to make the long trip back home, right across Europe, to his home in County Durham, near Sunderland. But while he's away, while he's been away 7 years, terrible things have happened at home. The little funny fishy thing that he threw down the well, because he didn't like the look of, has grown, the song says, grown and grown and grown and grown and grown an awful size. It had a great big head and great big teeth and great big goggly eyes. And it's frequently pictured wrapping itself around, I think what's it called? Some hill, I can't, Penshaw Hill. And it's a true story because there's a monument on the top of the hill that talks about it, and I've seen it. It wraps itself around Penshaw. It's got very big. It's grown and grown and grown and grown and grown an awful size. It's got more and more sinister, and it's laid waste Sir John's old homeland. It eats the sheep, and it eats the cattle, and it even eats the children, the bairns, until the land of the Lambtons has become a place of fear and terror. And when it's eaten its fill, apparently it does curl up around Penshaw Hill. So many brave knights have tried to kill the dragon, the worm, but they've all failed. They've all been killed. Because even if you cut this awful creature in two, it just joins back again. Just back together. Old Lord Lambton, who thinks his son must have died in the Crusades, I mean, he's given up all hope of ridding his land of the worm. And instead he's resorted to appeasement. So every day he fills a stone trough with the milk from a dozen cows as his offering to the dragon, to the worm. But even that doesn't stop the worm from eating sheep and cows and calves and bairns. So when Sir John gets back to his homeland, he doesn't find the happy place that he left. He finds a wasteland. And he immediately realises that this is all his own doing. This is his doing. If he had dealt, it's his responsibility. If he had dealt with his own unskillful tendencies, symbolised by the worm that he put down the well, instead of going off to fight the evil of other people that he saw out there, none of this would have happened. So he realises that it's his responsibility to kill the worm. His father and others try and stop him fighting the dragon because he'd just be throwing his life away. It's already killed loads of other knights. It just joins itself back together again if you cut it in pieces. But he's got to do it. So he goes to see an old wise woman to get some advice about how he can tackle the worm, tackle the dragon. And she says to him, well, you can't kill it. You're not going to be able to kill it. You're absolutely not by your own strength are you ever going to be able to kill this thing. The only way you will kill this thing is if you get it to use its own strength to kill itself. So what you've got to do is you get a suit of armour and you weld blades all over it. And then you tackle this thing, and you invite it to tackle you in the middle of the River Wear. And what it will do, it will wrap itself all around you and try and strangle you. But what it will do is actually cut itself in pieces. And those pieces will be washed away by the river. And that's the only way you're going to tackle it. We could say, there could be a whole talk about how you have to tackle unskillful tendencies by using their own strength rather than your own. But we won't go into all of that. Anyway, so he does all this. He gets the armour with all the stuff pointing out of it, and he goes and sits in the river and says, "Go on, I dare you," to the worm, or whatever. And sure enough, the fight takes place. But there's one other thing the wise woman also says to him, which I'd forgotten. She says that what you must do also, I don't know why, but who says what wise women, I mean, she's obviously got her own reasons. She says you've got to kill the first living thing you see after you've defeated the worm. So Lord Lambton makes a plan. He approaches his master of foxhounds, and he says to his master of foxhounds, look, when I've killed this worm, when I've killed this dragon, if that happens, I'm going to blow my horn. And when I blow my horn, I want you to at least let hound use, so that when I've killed the worm, okay, the next living thing I see will be a hound and not a person. So he goes into the battle, and sure enough, the dragon wraps itself around him and tries to squeeze him to death and cuts itself in lots of little pieces. And those pieces get washed away by the terrific current of the River Wear. So he gets out and he blows his hunting horn. But his father is hiding in the bushes, and his father is so delighted that his son survived the battle with the worm that his father dashes out to congratulate him. The first thing he sees is his father. But he's not going to kill his father, so the dog comes up behind him and kills the dog. But he knows that he hasn't fulfilled the conditions of the wise woman. And the wise woman had told him, if you don't do that, your family will be cursed. Your family will be cursed for 9 generations. So he kills the dog, thinking, maybe that's going to ward off the curse. I don't know, touch wood. But the curse did come true, apparently. In the first generation, his son Robert Lambton died at Newrig, the Battle of Newrig. The second, Sir William Lambton died at the Battle of Marston Moor. Third one, William Lambton died at the Battle of Wakefield. And so it goes on until the 9th generation, when the 9th, Henry Lambton, died in his carriage while crossing Lambton Bridge, but none of them ever died in their beds, which was the curse, that they wouldn't die in their beds. So that's a reasonably well-known, certainly in the northeast, myth that stood the test of time. And the reason it stood the test of time is because it says something, actually. It tells us something important about the way we unenlightened human beings behave, that we ignore our own unskillfulness, we try to stay unconscious of it. Our own anger and resentment and jealousy and competitiveness and greed. We turn a blind eye to all of that. We are largely unconscious of it. We throw it down the well where we can't see it. And we really, really don't see it. But we act on it. Everybody else sees it. But we pretty much think we're really nice people. So instead of looking at our own unskillfulness, we see evil out there in other people. We see it in all those other people. Sir John saw evil in the evil Muslim infidels that he went off to fight. They, of course, saw evil in him and his fellow Christians. Evil, always the evil is other people's evil. And we need to fight that. But really, what we might think of as evil is our unskillfulness, our mutual unskillfulness, the greed, hatred, and delusion that manifests through all of us unenlightened beings. It belongs to all of us individually, and it's hiding down the well in our own backyard. So we fight other people who we see as our evil enemies, and in this way we greatly increase the evil and the suffering in the world. But also, while we're fighting other people's evil and ignoring our own unskillful tendencies, the fishy bits of ourselves that we've put down the well, thrown out of consciousness, they grow an awful size if we're not careful. And they lay our world to waste. They lay our, if you like, our inner world to waste. They turn our inner mental world into a wasteland. They take away the beauty and they infect us with fear and anxiety and craving and resentment, lurking in the shadows of our mind that sort of poisons our mental atmosphere. And so they lay waste in our inner world. They also lay waste the outer world. The world is a mess to the extent that we, human beings, act out our greed, our hatred, our ill will, our delusion, our envy, our competitiveness, our resentment, our craving for more, give me more stuff, the extent to which we act on that while not being fully conscious of it, to that extent we lay the world to waste. We create wars, we create environmental crises, we create inequality and exploitation and oppression. And we all act out of those motivations to some extent as long as we're not enlightened, without really owning up to them, which means we can't do anything about it. The world we live in is created by the sum of the motivations of we human beings who live in it. Human beings like us, actually. But instead of owning up to our part of the problem, we see the problem as other people. The government, the Tories, America, Islam, global capitalism, whatever, something. We've all got our people who drive four-wheel drive vehicles. Sorry, personally. In suburbs, that is. So they're okay on the pampas. We blame and we get angry and self-righteous, maybe. We go off to fight evil out there, or at least we complain about it. But these evils, they just represent the summation of the motivations of a lot of human beings like us. People who, like us, are operating on a mixture of greed and hatred and delusion, mitigated by some higher impulses. And the very, very privileged life that we lead in this country. You know, I mean, if we really wanted to opt out of all of that, the proceeds that we've had from the slave trade, from et cetera, well, you know, I mean, I suppose we could go and live in a village in Africa, but not many of us do it. We're still benefiting. We're still benefiting from all of that. So samsara is the product of 7 billion people predominantly acting from self-referential motivations, while still insisting that we're all very nice people. And it's all somebody else's fault. So eventually, if we want to get real, like Sir John Lambton, we've got to take responsibility for our own unskillfulness that we'd rather not look at. We probably can't defeat it head on in battle, as he found out. We need to use cunning. We need to use its own strength against it. But even if we do that, we may still have to suffer from karmic consequences, which do pass down the generations. Because every time we try and fight somebody else's evil, we get a reaction back, actually. The consequences will carry on long after we're dead. Because we all co-create the world that we live in. Far better to get the worm out of the well, or not put it down there in the first place, and make friends with it and deal with it before it gets too big. That's the key, before it gets too big. And of course, that's one of the key things we need to do to become more integrated. We've got to, when we catch that fish, that fishy fish, when we realise something of ourselves out of the unconscious, we don't just throw it down a well, we actually look at it, own it, take responsibility for it. So how do we do this? How do we benefit from the truth of this myth? I think one thing we can do is to meditate. This is a really powerful aspect. We meditate. We can start to become more aware of what we're really feeling and thinking. So when we do the mindfulness of breathing, we focus on our breathing. Our mind settles down. Instead of being rushed and bundled along by our thoughts and our feelings, we can begin to stand back a bit, get some perspective, observe them. We can learn to watch our mind and watch our heart. We will sometimes experience unskillful thoughts and feelings coming up when we meditate. And what we don't want to do is go, in the well with you, which is what we sometimes do. Sometimes very unskillful thoughts and feelings will come up. They're products of past karma. They're products of the past conditioning, past karma. We don't have a choice about them coming up. They come up almost automatically. We don't have to blame ourselves for them. But we do have a choice about how we respond to them. But to have that choice, we have to acknowledge them. We have to become aware of them, acknowledge them, and take a choice about whether we want to put energy behind them. We have to, in a sense, accept that there are unskillful thoughts and feelings there. And to do that, we need to sort of forgive ourselves for them. We need to forgive ourselves, accept these unskillful thoughts, accept them in a sense. We're not accepting that, oh, I'm always going to be like that. But we need to accept that we are where we are. We are starting on our journey to enlightenment where we actually are. So we need to forgive ourselves for being the person that the past has made us. And that becomes an awful lot easier if we also forgive other people for being what the past has made them, instead of blaming them. While we blame other people, we're also, in a sense, blaming ourselves. And while we blame ourselves, we find it very difficult to really accept, if you like, to forgive ourselves for our unskillful motivations, etc. So there are some attitudes in meditation that we can cultivate to help us with this. Instead of having the attitude, if I have unskillful thoughts and feelings, that means I am bad. I am a bad person. We can learn to see that our thoughts and our feelings are conditioned phenomena. They are like mental weather. They are not me. They are not you. They are mental habits, perhaps. They are conditioned phenomena. We don't have to identify them with them. We don't have to think they're me. We can treat them as mental weather that comes and goes. Watch them and really powerfully watch them and label them. I really recommend this as a technique in meditation. I think we'll get a chance to do it later on. If you, this is why the teaching of the 5 hindrances is so useful, because it gives us labels that we can use. Once we label something, we've got a handle on it. We can objectify it and stand back from it. An example of this from my life, I remember, was talking to another order member about a project we were involved in. And I was in one of those moods where I was looking for all the things that could go wrong. This might happen, that might happen. What happens if he does that? Well, this might happen. What happens if that doesn't work? And after a bit of this, he was a New Zealander, and he had this very cool sort of atmosphere. He just sat back and he said, Vadanya, you are in the grip of the hindrance of anxiety and restlessness. And at that point, all I could do is go, it's a fair cop. And I couldn't do it anymore. So labeling is really, really powerful. Labeling suddenly gives you power over what you've labelled. My old friend, jealousy. There it goes. My old friend, resentment about that. Oh, there it goes. Oh, my old friend, greed. Yeah, I know I fancy a cream cake. I'm thinking about dinner. Sexual fantasy. Just label them, and suddenly it's not like we're in them, we're outside them looking at them. So labeling, I think, is a really strong one. Learning to know what's going on in our mind through meditation, and then of course extending that into our normal life. Once we've started to do that in meditation, it becomes very much easier to spot what's going on in a sort of quicker environment of ordinary life. And then, so that's the first thing, meditation. And then when we are, so the second thing I'd suggest is taking responsibility instead of blaming others. Taking responsibility instead of blaming others. Padmavajra, our president, was fond of quoting a quote that samsara is the tendency to find fault with others. I think we could say samsara is the tendency to blame others. And we all co-create samsara and then we blame others for it. We co-create samsara between us by not dealing with our own unskillfulness. And instead, trying to fight the unskillfulness we see in others. Maybe we go off to fight the infidel, whoever we see as being the infidel. And probably we do this with ill will in our hearts, and envy in our hearts, and a desire for status in our hearts, and a desire to get our own way in our hearts. But we think we're pure and fighting evil. And meanwhile, we lay the world waste by the conflicts we create, and the unskillful motivations we don't own up to but put down the world just get bigger and bigger and bigger and lay our inner world to waste. So it's crucial that we stop blaming and take responsibility. It's our worm. Take responsibility for our own greed, hatred and delusion. So I think another thing that goes along with not blaming, it's a sort of another aspect of not blaming, is to think about who we don't like and what we don't like. Who do we put in the fourth stage of the metta bhavana? Do we ever do anything a bit like they do? Are there any similarities between ourselves and them? What are our pet hates? What is it about other people that really gets our goat? Now, We've all got plenty of flaws and unskillfulnesses. Why is it that that particular one is just absolutely infuriating? It's almost, I think, an accepted psychological fact. And the reason it's so infuriating is because it's in us too, actually, because we shoved it down the well. So it's really revealing to think, what are my pet hates? What really gets me going? And who don't I like? Very often the things that really annoy us are things we do ourselves, or things we would like to do ourselves, actually. So having seen and having done this work, if you like, to see and recognise aspects of ourselves we don't like, to sort of circle them out, we can start to transform them. And I'd like to use an analogy here. It's a bit as though our inner world were a kingdom. And we are the monarch, we are the king or queen in this kingdom. But some of our subjects are very, very unruly, or even criminal. But we're the monarch. We need to gain their loyalty. We maybe need to just stop them doing really horrible things, so we need to be aware of them. But we also need to gain their loyalty, control them when necessary, but gain their loyalty so that we get them on our side working for us. We're using them. So how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we get these unruly and even criminal subjects of ours to respect and obey us so that we can use them for the things that, if you like, our higher self wants to do? Well, the first thing I think is that we need to be doing something worthwhile with our life. We need to have a purpose that's a bit higher than just our own pleasure or whatever, wealth or whatever. To get these unruly servants serving us, these unruly subjects serving us, serving their king or their queen, we need to get their respect. And to get their respect, we need to be about something that's a bit bigger than our own pleasure or our own possessions or something like that. Who respects a king or a queen who's just about themselves? Nobody. Subjects don't respect such a ruler. So we need to get their respect. And to do that, we need to be about something worthwhile. So we need to get their respect, do something worthwhile, be about something worthwhile, and then get our unruly subjects working for that goal. We need to give them something to do. We need to give them something to do in the cause that we've got. Are we competitive? Are we competitive? Well, try to have the best Buddhist centre in the country. Try to be the best helper of the disadvantaged. The best doctor, the best whatever it is we're doing. Use that competitiveness. Do we seek respect and status? Well, let's seek respect and status from people who we really respect. Let's try to be as good a person, as great a person, as magnificent a person as we can to get real respect. Are we ambitious? Be ambitious for the cause that we're serving. Have we got aggression? Well, turn that aggression on the obstacles that stand in the way of doing the worthwhile thing that we're seeking to do. So that rather than them being turned on people. And if we do that sort of thing, if we get these criminal or unruly subjects sort of in the army or the navy or the air force or the spies or whatever they're doing, the civil service, if we get them serving us, they will gradually be transformed. They will gradually be transformed by the fact that they are serving something higher than themselves. They'll gradually be transformed, and it's as though, another analogy, the worm, when we get the worm, we sort of put a collar on it, stroke it, feed it, it gets bigger and bigger, and eventually we can ride around on it. So the Christian approach to dragons is you kill them like St. George. The Buddhist approach to dragons is much more that you you become aware of them, you make friends with them, and then you ride around with them, and that's much more fun and that's much more fun.